Hello there. Sherry brought up the question of color in the tarot in the comments in the last one. I'm going to stick with the sweets just because it's easier to deal with, and the major arcana is much more complex in general in some ways. Not that the minors aren't complex. It's all complex, but it's a whole nother ballgame playing with the major arcana and color. And I feel like while it's there, it's much more loose and freeform than what you tend to see in the suits. And the suits is really where you tend to see color play in a lot to a certain extent. I'm kind of looking for, there's a wands. Hermit. Oh, come on, I'm hitting all the major arcana cards at the moment. Not. Yeah, I could be really on it and separate these out beforehand, but really, what would you do then if you didn't get to look at me picking through cards? Come back here. So, you have 4 suites in the tarot. You have swords, which correlate to air, which is often yellow. Let me see if I can find a sword. I'm finding cups, which correlates to air. Here. Which is often yellow. In this deck, they tend to take on a purpley blue deck. I'm using the Tarot of the Divine Legacy just because he has a good sense of color usage. I do, with his swords, he goes for more of a purpley, even though technically it would be like a yellow, but his deck actually really, when it comes down to it, is very nicely color-coded for the suites. He's very consistent in how he uses his color for the most part within swords in it. Not all decks bring in color to a certain extent as much as this one kind of does. You tend to see more freeform, and it's more symbol than actual color. But you tend to see, and I think this is a good example of how people jump off from, say, the traditional correspondences into something else. Because if you take his swords, they're kind of a bluey, dark color when it comes down to what he's chosen for them, which would probably not really be considered a traditional, but when you look at it, it's kind of airy and it fits the moodiness of the swords. So instead of taking, say, a traditional yellow or orange color that is typically associated with swords or air, he goes for a different place. So here's one example where you don't quite have the traditional take on it. Whereas his coins, which is earth, sometimes called pentacles, discs, coins, is earth, which typically and traditionally is green. Now you look at this as the Queen of Coins. She's very green. And you go, I know I have several others here. And when you look at his coins in general, they're very green. He uses that motif in it, which is a more traditional choice than, say, this one. But, you look at the swords, and it's got that nice moodiness to it that really works for swords. Swords, cups. And within cups, which is water, which typically blue is a very obvious choice for water, because water tends to be blue. I'm like, where did I put the whole deck? And you can kind of see a little bit of crossover in the coloring, because here's the Knight of Cups. Here's Page of Swords. And they're both kind of, I'd say this one's a little more purpley than blue. So you kind of, he could have went for yellow for this. But I think if he would have missed the moodiness that this deck brings out. But his water cards, the cups, are also tend to be blue in a very watery kind of way. Because cups, well, they represent water. And here's the Queen of Swords. Once again, choice is not yellow, but very powerful and very... Oh, I could have grabbed Thoth. Well, no, Thoth doesn't the court cards. Never mind. Thinking to myself. Prince. Then you have wands here, which are fire, oftentimes called rods. And he uses a red motif, which would be their traditional choice. And see, here's the King of Coins once again. Look at all that green. Green and gold really, in this deck, bring out the coins. And all his wands tend to have some kind of glowy redness going on in it, which is a very traditional choice for fire. At the same time, you notice he's not afraid to branch out. So really, you know, the thing with color in the tarot is that, yes, there are traditional associations that go with each suite. And it's up to you how much you want to bring that in, and do you want to limit yourself that much by that, or do you want to make it more freeform? So, you know, I would... You know, everyone's going to have a slightly different take on color when it comes to suites and tarot in general. So you really create your own. Once again, it comes down to creating that personal connection between you and your tarot deck or decks, and how you want to view it. You know, because no one's going to see it the same as someone else, and that's okay. So really, you know, it's kind of like color. I tend to, if I'm going to use it, distill it down into what am I looking at? Earth, air, fire, water. What are my suites? What am I looking at? If I use it at all. And certain decks will bring it in more than others. And this one does a fair amount of coloring, using color within the Minor Arcana. So, and that was the legacy of, oh my god, brain grab, Legacy of Divine Tarot by Ciro Marchetti. Okay, bye-bye.